Hello, everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Thanks for tuning in. So today we will be discussing an important topic, which is food deserts and food insecurity and its interactions with race and positionality in the United States. So definitely stay tuned as we go through the presentation, and then we'll go over how to kind of go about using your privilege to solve this problem in our country. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. And we can go over the presentation. All right, so food deserts and race in the United States. So this is just kind of an agenda to give an idea of what we will be going through in this presentation. So we're going to start off with the definition of what is food insecurity and a food desert, then going into nutrition and why nutrition is important, why accessing healthy foods and a balanced diet is integral to the health and your mortality rate in the United States. Then we're going to go into the rates of food insecurity and how race and racial challenges kind of tie into that in our country. Finally, we're going to go over solutions and how we as Americans can take action and help those that are less privileged than us. So to begin, the definition of food insecurity is limited access to affordable and fresh, nutritious food. So this could be anything from not being near a grocery store to living in an apartment building and not being able to grow your own fresh foods. You're also in an area where there's no large supermarkets or grocery stores. So this again is in an area, maybe a rural area or a more impoverished area where you don't have the transportation to access grocery stores. Maybe there's no farmers markets or any local shops to kind of get fresh produce for a balanced diet. So again, this is a nice little diagram to visualize the difference between high food security and very low food security. So you can kind of look at the diagram and see, where am I on the food security pyramid? So if you're in the green zone at the top, you're a household that has no problems or anxiety about or consistently accessing adequate food. So this is going to be a person that never really has to worry where they're getting their food from. If they're eating a balanced meal, they have access to fruits and vegetables, high quality dairy products. Again, this is a person that is not worried about where their next meal is going to come from. So that's what high food security is. As we go down the pyramid towards very low food security, which is that little red area at the bottom. So this means at times during the year, eating patterns of one or more household members were disrupted and food intake was reduced because the household lacked money or other resources for food. So again, this is going to be a family or an individual that oftentimes is not sure where they're going to get their next meal from. Maybe they only really have access to fast food or food that isn't really rich in nutrients and vitamins. So that's going to be very low food security there on the bottom in the red zone. Moving forward, I did want to touch on the importance of nutrition. So just to begin, nutrient-dense versus calorie-dense foods. So nutrient-dense means that the food has a lot of nutrients in it. For example, an apple is going to have a lot of vitamin C, vitamin A, all kinds of vitamins for you. Versus calorie dense is something like French fries that are going to be high in fat, maybe not have a lot of vitamins in them. It's also possible that you have very nutrient dense food that is calorie dense. For example, red meat is going to be pretty calorie dense, but also there's a lot of nutrients that go into red meat, proteins and iron and magnesium that are all integral to having a balanced diet. So it's important to think, when you're eating foods, am I balancing nutrient dense foods versus calorie dense foods? Am I just eating foods that have a lot of calories and will fill me up, but aren't really helping my body and aren't providing any great nutrients, again, and vitamins that are gonna be important to the bodily systems and functions? Going forward, cancer, depression, anxiety, stunting and nutritional deficiencies, and heart disease are all linked to whether or not you have a balanced, nutrient-dense diet. Things like antioxidants, omega-3s, HDL cholesterol can all be found in our diets and are very important for preventing these diseases. So again, make sure you're looking for nutrient dense foods rather than calorie dense when you're making a meal. So again, heart disease can be prevented by having a well-balanced diet and an exercise regimen. So heart disease is the leading cause of death in the United States, which is pretty scary. But as scary as it is, heart disease is preventable. If you're implementing an exercise plan, if you're having a well-balanced diet with all those good things that we discussed before, you will have a lower risk of heart disease. Heart disease can come in many forms. Atherosclerosis, which is just a fancy word for plaque buildup in your arteries. So if you look at the picture to the right, that yellow stuff that you're seeing build up on that wall, that's making it kind of difficult for the blood to flow through the veins and arteries. That is atherosclerosis, and it is very negative for the body, as blood is the transportation method for nutrients and vitamins to get around the body. Stroke and myocardial infarction. So basically that is just a blood clot that gets stuck and causes a stroke or heart attack that could sometimes be deadly. Hypertension, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, again, another disease that can be prevented by a well-balanced diet and exercise regimen. And finally, high cholesterol, again, another disease that can be prevented with good nutrition and access to a grocery store to get that good nutrition. All right, so this is a map of the United States, clearly. And this is just kind of giving you a visualization of the percentage of the United States population that does not have access to a car, and they are not within a mile of a supermarket store. So as you notice in the southeast part of the country, you're going to have a greater density of individuals that have really low access to a grocery store. And again, here in this West Virginia area, you're going to have a little bit more of a food insecurity issue. And again, out towards the west and southwest, west of Texas, and we are challenging my geography here. I think that is South Dakota or the Colorado area. And yeah, so very interesting to visualize where those food deserts are in the United States. So this is also a great visual to kind of see how the health indicators are overlapping with low-income households and food deserts. So in the top left, you're going to see that blue map of the United States and see where the low-income households that are more than a mile from a grocery store, that represents a food desert area. So you can kind of see where those are and then how they overlap with health indicators like diabetes and obesity as a risk factor for heart disease. So you can see the obesity rates, the diabetes rates are in similar areas. If you can kind of visualize how all of the countries would look if they're stacked on top of each other, the areas would be similar where the food deserts are to where the risk factors for cardiovascular disease are. And that is a very important point. As I mentioned before, that nutrition is a precursor for heart issues and heart disease. So going forward, how does race interact and play into food insecurity and food deserts? So it's important to understand that where our food system has come from. So our current farms, factories, and food systems are built on the exploitation of minorities and Black and brown bodies and labor. So if we look back to the early history of the United States, those Black bodies and that labor was exploited in slavery to give us cotton, to give us food, just as free labor and farm work and sugarcane even. And that hasn't stopped. So technically it's legal now, but again, we still struggle with a lot of prejudice and discrimination against minorities in the United States, and we're exploiting their labor still to this day. So as you can see, 85% of people working on farms are Latinx identifying individuals. and only 2.5% of farms are owned by Latinx identifying individuals, which is a huge problem. So we need to give the power back to these people of color that are working so hard to provide us for our food, and just allow them to have the strength and leadership to even out the playing field and bring equity back to our country. And again, so because these people's labor are being exploited, and they're in food deserts in areas that have limited access to quality nutrition, many diseases linked to poor nutrition are disproportionately affected by racial minorities. So that's a very important point. When we look at the health of our country, you are far more likely to develop heart disease, diabetes, anxiety and depression, and even stunted growth when you have poor nutrition and are a minority in the United States, which is absolutely unacceptable. And we need to work to improve this. So moving forward, the USDA even said in one of their articles about food insecurity that higher concentrations of minority populations are more likely to be food deserts. So things that go into play in these food deserts are things like wage gaps in our country. So the average income for white males as of 2019, believe, was the data that I could find, was $65,000, while Hispanic men was only $51,000 and Black males is $43,000. So again, with that access to food, the wage and income for these individuals is a big factor. Can you afford transportation? Can you afford to buy these fresh produce things? Can you afford to live in an area where you're not in a food desert, where you do have access to fresh ingredients? That all comes with income. So it's imperative to note that the wage gaps do have a stake in this. Also, COVID-19 has made food insecurity worse as well. Tying into the wage gap thing, COVID-19 has made it a big struggle for people. Maybe they're laid off because of COVID-19 and that's affecting their annual income. Or maybe you're scared and you're sick and you have to take care of a sick family member, and that's going to affect how often you can go to a grocery store and make that trip to get fresh fruits and vegetables. So again, all kinds of things kind of are a domino effect in affecting food insecurity in the United States. So this is a diagram I thought was nice to kind of visualize how all different kinds of people in color are affected by food insecurity. Oftentimes, Black individuals are kind of zeroed in on when talking about the food insecurity issue because they are at such a higher risk. But it's important to mention all peoples of color, not just one minority, and give them a space to kind of educate and not just on one racial minority. So again, if you look at the top, 1 in 4 Native American individuals live in a food insecure household, and that is that's the biggest ratio of individuals in a food insecure household. And then if you look at the bottom, 1 in 17 Asian individuals are in a food insecure household. So you can see how different races in the United States are more or less at risk of being food insecure. This is a nice diagram as well, or graph, if you will, I apologize. It shows how over time on the x-axis and the deaths per 100,000 persons on the y-axis, and this is the death rates for heart disease by race and Hispanic origin from 1999 to 2017. So basically what this graph is showing us is how many deaths in the United States occur because of heart disease separated by race. So you can see if you are Black and not Hispanic, you are at the greatest likelihood of dying from heart disease in the United States. And then right below that, you're white. You're second most likely to die from heart disease in the United States. And then going down, the blue is Hispanic and the purple is Asian or Pacific Islander. So this is just a little note on disability and food insecurity. And I got this diagram from a DC organization That's our nation's capital. And they work to provide SNAP coupons for households, which is basically a food stamp for individuals who are food insecure to provide them adequate nutrition. So they recorded that SNAP households contain a person with disabilities. There are 1 in 5 chances of containing a person with disabilities. So again, giving that, having that visual of showing that 1 in 5 households contain a person with disabilities. So again, looking at the minorities in our country and how much more likely they are to be food insecure, again, absolutely unacceptable, and just shows the prejudice and separation that we have in our country. So now that we have an idea of what's happening in our country, let's talk about some solutions. So it's really important when you're going to a doctor's office, physicians need to understand positionality in health when diagnosing. So what this means basically is, as a healthcare provider, a nurse, doctor, what have you, and you have a child coming in with maybe chronic stomach aches and fatigue. So as a healthcare physician or healthcare professional, excuse me, you need to be able to understand, not just looking at the symptoms of that patient, that they have the stomach ache, they have the fatigue. You need to look at the big picture. Where is this child coming from? What is the race of this child? Are they in a good family safe setting? What is their access to food? So having all these pieces of the puzzle and understanding positionality is going to help diagnoses of children and adults for that matter, but also put the pieces together for our country in assessing what is the effect of food insecurity on patients and on healthcare. So again, moving forward, health education is really important. So teaching students when they're in school, when they're young, what does it mean to read the nutrition label on the back of something? What is a calorie? What's a vitamin? Understanding these things and understanding the impact that nutrition can have on your health is integral to the health and the choices that adults will make for years to come on what they're putting in their bodies. So by 2020, 40% of America's children will be minorities. And that means it's going to be even more important to explain the impact of food insecurity on families and the issues that we have on hand. And it's important to also teach the children that are privileged, that are not in food deserts, what's happening in other parts of the world and what they can do to help. So that being said, feedingamerica.org is a large organization. Many people have heard of it. They host food banks all over the country, and you can donate at any time if you're available to, right on their website, which is great. They're also a very large organization, which makes it easy for them to have outreach for people. They don't really have to explain their mission to people that much. It's just kind of, it's easier for people to understand what they're doing and what they're trying to do when you use a large organization. And they also have a lot of resources for people, which is great. So going through a larger organization can be beneficial, but also maybe going through a smaller organization at a more targeted community could be beneficial as well. But definitely doing your research and working to help them donate. Going forward, like I said, if you want to do more of a targeted community organization, look for minority-run organizations. Give the power back to the people that have been so unfairly discriminated against. Give them a voice. So like I mentioned before, DC Hunger Solutions is led by BIPOC people, and they're working to reduce hunger in DC. So again, they're recognizing the inequalities and food insecurity in their city, and they're working to provide both education and resources to these people to give them a better sense of nutrition and help their long-term health goals in the end. Another one that I found was Soulfire Farm. Again, this is run by women of color, men of color, people who identify anywhere in between. And it's really great. They use, actually, here we go, Soulfire Farm. They use Afro-Indigenous agroforestry, wildcrafting, polyculture, and spiritual farming practices to produce agriculture, to give crops to people And they also educate and equip adults and youth with skills to lead. So their goal at Soulfire Farm is to put these BIPOC individuals in charge, have them be leaders, give them business experience. Again, just putting the power back in their hands, which is ultimately the goal. So how can you make a difference? Like I said, donate. If you have the means, any bit helps. Finding your local food drive, maybe donating money if you can, anything helps. Educating people, talk about these issues. It's okay if it's at the dinner table. It's okay if you're out with your friends. Just having these discussions and having people understand what's happening in our country is the first step to making change. That being said, if you want to educate people, share this video. You're on YouTube right now, share the link to 3 friends. Say, hey, this is what's going on. I found this was interesting. And the bottom line is understand your privilege and work to lift others up. So feel free to screenshot this, post this to your story, and share. Together we can make a difference. People don't deserve to be hungry. Being hungry is one of the most awful feelings, and we all deserve and have a right to have food and have nutritious food at that. We can put a stop to heart disease in our country and the inequalities that are the nutritional gaps in our country. So please screenshot this page, share it to whatever social media you can, and thank you for tuning in.